Truckers of Reddit, what is something you have witnessed driving at night that gave you chills? Not me, but my mother's fiancé. Although this was maybe 10 plus years ago, he explained to me he often has nightmares about the situation, especially after telling the story. At the time, he was on a highway near New Jersey and it was raining heavily. An SUV with a young guy, driver, and girl, passenger, inside was moving through lanes erratically and eventually hydroplaned, sending the SUV completely underneath another truck that was ahead of him. When an accident happens with a truck, I believe that the others surrounding also have to pull over to help assist, which they did. My mother's fiancé goes over to the wrecked truck. The driver is perfect without a scratch but is running around full of adrenaline and disbelief. However, when he goes around to the passenger side and pulls out the young girl, he notices that she had been completely scalped. He puts a sweatshirt that he had on underneath her head so he could lay her down on the ground, and he told me that it had been gray but was completely red within minutes. Paramedics had been called, and at this point the girl was shaking and had lost so much blood. Visibly terrified, he lifts her up and holds her in his arms and tells her that everything is going to be okay, that help is on the way and that she isn't going to die. I can't remember if she spoke to him, but he did tell me that she wasn't looking at him. It was like she was looking through him, and then she took her last breath in his arms. He quit the trucking business immediately after that and hasn't been the same since. Referring back to the nightmare, he says it's completely black except for her face, and she repeatedly says, "Why did you let me die?" He can't watch any gory movies or shows without being triggered. My dad was driving to work early one morning and watched the car in front of him swerve off the road and roll. A guy had fallen asleep in front of him with his girlfriend asleep in the back. She had no seat belt on, and my dad found her still breathing in the grass, gave her his leather jacket for her head and waited with her until she stopped breathing and the ambulance came. Found out it was a girl he worked with. He didn't recognize her face when he found her after the accident. I watched a truck full of people burn to the ground. I pulled the kids out, but there was nothing I could do for the adults. I still have nightmares about it. I had a friend tell me a story once that they looked at the side of the road and a person was running next to the cab of their truck, keeping pace at about 65 miles per hour. They said it had happened years ago and they were visibly shaken when telling me the story. My uncle is a trucker and we live in Utah. I mentioned Skinwalker Ranch to him and he immediately knew what I was talking about and said a lot of guys will not take any runs over near that place. He's heard some crazy shit and doesn't want to ever go out there. Had a friend who was a truck driver tell about a time he saw a flipped truck on the side of the road. He stopped and there was trash all over from the truck. He kicked a sleeping bag that was in the road, but realized it had the body of a kid in it. I had a load from Laredo TX to San Diego. Got it around 8 p.m. and started driving down a highway to meet up with the 10 closer to TXNN border. Around midnight I noticed a guy in Native American garb just standing on the side of the road 40-ish miles from any town. Don't think anything of it, but it was always a little weird seeing someone in the middle of nowhere. About an hour later I see the same guy by. They looked a little different and this time their eyes shined back at my truck the same way cats or dogs do. About this time I got creeped out. But I still had time to drive and I kept going thinking I had just imagined it. But again 20 minutes later I see the same person, same eye shine, but they don't look right, their face was distorted. I passed through a small town. I now wish I had stopped it, but I kept going. Same thing happened again about 30 miles from the town, but now they were hunched over, still just stared at me. I was running out of drive time and had to find a place to stop, and the next town was over an hour away. I found a rest stop, a small picnic area along the highway in the middle of nowhere. Soon as I turned the truck off I started hearing howling, like wolves were right outside of my truck growling and howling. It lasted about 5 minutes and I sat in the sleeper with my gun, panicked. I never got out of the cab till the next morning and I didn't sleep much. When I got out the next day there were paw prints all around my truck about the size of my hand. I never drove through there again. Another time I saw a guy in a hospital gown eating a road-killed deer at 2 a.m. when it was freezing outside. Edit for words and words again. Mine wasn't at night, but I was driving a grain hauler, full size, fully loaded, 80,000 pounds, on a 4-lane highway through a downtown section on my way to the plant where I had to unload. On this road, most of the businesses and buildings are a sidewalk width away from the road. There is a curb, sidewalk, and then the buildings. Impossible to see around these buildings, and for some reason, Subway decided to put in a franchise at one of these buildings where their drive-through lets out into the road. You park at the window, and you are ready to pull out into the road, except, you can't see the oncoming traffic, and oncoming traffic can't see you. I was heading past, and this lady coming out of this drive-through jumped out at full speed when I'm at full road speed, 50 miles per hour I think, less than a car length in front of me. I slam the brakes, drop the clutch, throw into the neutral, and grab the wheel with both hands like I'm bracing for a plane to crash. I can't swerve left, because there were multiple cars next to my trailer, and I can't go right, because pedestrians in the buildings. I had to keep it straight and stop ASAP. I managed to do it, but it was so close I can tell you with absolute certainty that the little red-headed boy in her back seat was missing his 2 front teeth and he had on a Paw Patrol shirt. Every time I drove past that spot after that I slowed down to about 30 because I am not going to be the guy that takes out someone in their brand new sandwich. I think about it all the time. Once I saw something fall off the overpass onto the interstate a ways ahead of him. Turned out to be a man jumping off. He was able to miss the man on the interstate but saw another semi run over the body. Also, he told me about a time he was stopped in the right lane due to a sudden traffic backup and a vehicle in the left lane could not stop in time and went into the back of a semi. My wife was riding with me somewhere in Texas and it wasn't dark, but it was getting dark. We were on a road with no other traffic for miles and miles. There was a shadow of a horse running along beside us, but there was no horse to be seen anywhere around us. Creepy. Not me but my dad. About a year ago he was 70-ish yards behind a moving truck coming up on a hill in a Amish area. There was a buggy with an old man, his 2 adult sons and his grandson. Moving truck doesn't see the buggy, hits it from behind at about 50-ish mile per hour. Dad stops, knows first aid, tries to help, gets everyone onto the shoulder. Moving truck guy gets his first aid kit, so does Dad. An off-duty paramedic and a former combat medic show up 30-ish minutes later. Ambulances. Their 2 adult sons had many broken bones but lived. Grandkid is wheelchair-bound and Grandpa is declared DOA. Dad and people helping tried CPR but it didn't work due to internal bleeding, making the man drown in his own blood. His last words were, "Father, please judge me, truly see my sins and punish me justly." Note, he said that about 4-ish minutes before death. Happened to my grandfather. He was a trucker back in the day and was driving in Georgia, and as he was going under an overpass he saw a figure come flying down and he didn't have any time to react and so ran it over. He said he had never been so terrified in his life. Luckily for him, it was just some kids who threw a scarecrow in front of his truck as a prank. He saw them biking away. He lived to be 94 and always claimed he never worried about his heart because if it didn't give out in that moment he was confident it would keep ticking forever. Not a trucker but a cab driver. I drive in NYC so it's pretty shady. I'll keep it short. One night a man ended up in my headlights carrying a Dunlap sack with something in it. My phone received the Amber Alert and I freaked out. Man froze, looked at me and ran. I panicked. I pissed myself. Next day in the news. Girl in Long Island disappears. I was making a delivery on an Air Force base when I worked for International. I was driving a box truck and needed to take the back gate all the way on the other side. As I'm driving I see a few people out running and a few on bikes. There was one guy in a gray shirt with black shorts walking along. I drove past him and make my delivery. About 15 minutes later I'm heading back the opposite direction towards the gate to leave when I see 2 base police cars on the side of the road. MPs, military police, with their guns drawn, with the guy in the gray shirt on the ground. Not sure exactly why this creeped me out, but I think it may be the fact that I saw him first as an ordinary person and then shortly after as a criminal. Not at night but a story that just popped in my head. I was heading from Jacksonville to Punta Gorda in Florida. Usually not a horrible drive, traffic was especially slow, so you assume it's an accident or something simple. I'm about an hour from my destination. Traffic still just creeping in both directions on the highway. And I see another truck hauling a UPS truck riddled with bullet holes and blood all over the floor. My heart sank. You see a lot of bad accidents where you assume people died and shit like that, but seeing that you just know there was loss of life. I later found out that the UPS driver, 27 meters, was robbed and taken hostage by 2 shooters down near Miami. The police got in a shootout with them and killed the driver and another passerby, 70 meters, in their car. As well as the 2 pieces of shit who robbed the driver. Edit. No statements have been released confirming nor denying that it was the police that accidentally killed the innocents in the crossfire. So I redact my statement about it feeling shitty that the police killed them. The investigation is still ongoing apparently. RIP to the innocents killed that day. I was staying out at my grandparents' ranch one time, about 20 miles into the desert from a small town right off the freeway. I had been there a few days working and whatnot. But one night, I just couldn't sleep. I started getting a headache, and if I had a thermometer I'm sure it would have shown that I had a fever. I'm going in and out of sleep throughout the night but not able to get any real rest. At some point I eventually am able to fall asleep deep enough to dream. Oh, how wrong I was, as this was in fact a nightmare. All I remember from the nightmare was seeing a face surrounded by red. I woke up, scared shitless, as I thought I had seen the devil in my sleep. I make my way to the kitchen to get some water since my head was still pounding and I couldn't sleep after that. The next day I'm driving back home, from the ranch to the town, and back to the city. It's getting late since I didn't leave until after lunch and it's about a 3-hour drive total. Coming up on a large turn around a mountain I see a semi-truck flipped on the side of the road. The barrier between the lanes was taken out, so I assumed the truck had driven through it and landed on the edge of the opposite roadway. I pull over and get out to see exactly what's going on, and I find this guy laying outside the truck on the ground. I look at his face, surrounded by red blood and brain matter that had seeped out, and I realize it was the same face from my dream the night before. Not a trucker, but I once saw a prostitute get out of the cab of a truck as I was filling up on gas at a truck stop. Prostitute proceeded to take a soda out of her purse and use it as a douche just before entering another truck. I still have PTSD from it. My BF and I were in the middle of an 8-hour road trip. It was already dark, and as I was pulling off the highway to a gas station/rest stop, we saw a tall man in a white tee rapidly crossing the multiple-lane road. A long truck rushed by in a blur, and the next second after it passed the man was gone. My BF asked, super spooked, "Did you see that guy?" And I had definitely glimpsed him rushing across the road as I was driving. We both saw him, yet there was no one there when we looked again. No guy dead or alive. I ended up insisting that we must have imagined it, or that he must have been fine and made it away safely, just because any other explanation was too creepy. Happened to my wife and I one night. 2-lane highway with thick woods on either side, and this guy steps out of the woods and into the road. Swore I hit him, but no sound. After slamming on the brakes and practically hyperventilating, I got out with a flashlight. Another vehicle was behind us and he'd swerved too, so we're out looking, checking my bumper, under the truck, both sides of the road, and found nothing. The driver of the car behind us said he thought the dude stepped out between the vehicles and he had wondered why we swerved. Either way, it was raining and no footprints in the mud or anything. Someone called the police and they came out and searched, asked questions, whatever. They never found anything either and acted like we were all crazy. It was very weird. Not a truck driver. Former courier, day or night, it doesn't matter. Police, paramedics and firefighters cleaning up after a crash. Broken pieces of cars, plastic, bodies, so much liquid on the road, even if they have covered the majority of the gore. You know, looking into the eyes of the people who are dealing with death. You know, honestly the worst I personally saw was limp arms or legs, I'm not sure, visible. But you knew the human being was dead. Just a bit of a limb not entirely covered by a blanket or whatever. Sad stuff, and this is why I don't mess around when I drive. Wasn't at night, but I was approaching Indianapolis once in the center lane of the interstate. Another truck was in the left lane ahead of me and I just barely caught sight of his truck hitting a dog at roughly 70 miles per hour. A few seconds up the road I passed a car pulled off into the median just before the exit ramp and saw a family standing outside their car with a young woman holding an empty leash. Wasn't at night. I was hauling a load from Idaho to SLC, Utah. There was a small build-up of cars passing me. Probably 15 or so, with 2 Harleys in the middle. 5 cars passed before the Harleys came alongside. I had a weird feeling the second they passed in front of me and turned off my cruise control and gave a bunch of space. For reasons unknown to me, the 5 cars in front of the bikes went from 75/80ths of a mile per hour to 50. All the brake lights. I could see for miles that it was clear. None of the cars were doing anything to provoke the others, but all 5 cars in both lanes just smashed their brakes. One of the bikes tried to slow down but went into a tank slapper and rear-ended a Camry on the passenger side. He was thrown from the bike directly in front of my truck. That's when the other weird thing was happening. All the cars that were waiting to pass me were not next to me. I was able to stop the truck and block traffic for this biker to keep him safe. In the time it took me to pull my brakes, there were 7 people on the highway as I walked up to assess this dude. No helmet, foot's detached but hanging on somehow, upper leg caved in, no profuse bleeding. Skull's fractured, kneecap is behind me. In the span of 2 minutes I had all the first aid I needed from the people gathered around and 3 people on the phone. 4 people with a sheet to raise up and act like tent poles to give him some shade. 5 towels to stop bleeding and secure his head while I was down there keeping him talking and not moving while he went into shock. Ambulance was there 5 minutes after the crash, police were there in 7. Turns out the exit we just passed had a major hospital for the area. I was able to get his buddy in my truck to fill out paperwork. No one from then police or ambulance had checked him. He starts an adrenaline letdown and shock. Able to cool him off and get a medic in the truck to check on him. Turns out they are both 65+ years old heading to the crash victim's son's wedding that day. They had taken off their helmets at the border for some fresh air and said FCK it because laws in Utah. Last I heard they were able to save the foot and the dude was kept at the hospital for a while because he had crushed his skull. I've had feelings like that a lot while driving and I really pay attention when they come on. I've no idea what it is, but it's saved me from roughly 35 incidents over the course of the last 1.5 million miles. Driving to Florida on a foggy early morning, I saw a person lying dead beside a flipped-over Jeep. It made me wake up and seriously watch the road for the rest of my journey. So, I remember reading a story about a year ago. I think it was a glitch in the Matrix. They were walking on the sidewalk on a crowded street and a lady was walking the other way. As she got near, he got really dizzy and felt sick, and other people around him did too. Can anyone help find the up? Today I saw a small little cruiser cop car pull over a massive semi and I just thought it was the weirdest thing. Does this happen more often than I think? If so, what are the reasons? Not a trucker, but saw a motorcycle swerve and crash inside a tunnel just as I was entering it. Didn't comprehend the whole situation until I got closer. The guy driving was alright but clearly hysterical. Turns out the girl sitting behind him got her, apparently very long hair, stuck in the rear wheel and got scalped all the way to the back of her neck. As a medical student I don't mind seeing blood, but watching someone suffer an injury hits hard. Can't get over the human aspect of it. Called for an ambulance, and I don't know what happened to the girl after that. Not myself, but a guy called up, I believe, ABC radio station in Alice with this report about a yowie, somewhat like Australian Bigfoot, which I'm sure is a hoax but sounds somewhat believable as he tells it, just the details don't add up. The area he is talking about is rich with yowie stories and sightings. Worth a listen if that kind of stuff interests you. I was once driving in a sparsely populated area in western Kansas. I kept getting passed by a very worn-out looking old motorhome with several very creepy/scary looking people in it looking out the windows at me as they drove by. They must have passed me several times before I realized there had been no place for them to turn off or pull over where I wouldn't have seen them pulled off as I went by. I have no idea how they kept getting behind me and having to pass each time. It was all very creepy. Not a trucker, but one time my band was playing a show in Peoria, Illinois, and we were heading back to the Quad Cities. We stopped at the last rest stop before the QC to piss. When we entered the restroom there was a guy standing in there speaking gibberish, but he was wearing a uniform. When we went to pee there was children's diapers wrapped in children's underwear in the urinal, and this is what we were pissing into. Thinking this was extremely odd, I asked my guitar player to get my camera from the van, SLR. I took some picture of the diapers and wanted to get a picture w the guy in it. When my friend took the pic, the guy realized what was happening and basically cornered us. My friend left me in the bathroom by myself w this guy, and I was so creeped out I just opened my camera and ripped the film out and ran to the van. He ran after me and I jumped in the van and we left. We were underage and drunk, so we decided not to call the police until that following Monday, which we did, and never heard anything about it again. Not anymore, but was on an interstate run almost the middle of the night with my then fiancé. Something big and black but sort of a shadow, honestly it looked like the Reaper. We both saw it and quizzed each other. It only lasted a couple of seconds. I am a skeptic, so it could have been an owl's shadow due to the headlights, but not kidding. The next 6 or 7 vehicles never once flashed their lights at us to indicate we still had our high beams on, which we did. Things only went back to normal maybe 20 minutes later when I got a phone call. It was like some sort of pause on our lives for a short period. Professional driver here. Was in Wisconsin, delivering a load of tubing. Don't remember the highway, but it was divided, separated by what we call Jersey barriers. 6 lanes total, 3 on either side. About 2 a.m., I saw headlights ahead of me a ways, and something looked off. I'm in the granny lane, slow lane, and a couple of minutes later, the car passes me, in the hammer lane, fast lane, on my side of the barriers, my side of the highway. Driving the wrong way. Not a truck driver, but I once had to make a 2-hour-long drive home late at night down a country highway. I saw a pretty girl that looked like an 18-year-old runaway hitchhiking at midnight. The whole drive I wondered if I should have turned around and picked her up before some psycho did, or she got hit by somebody asleep at the wheel and left there. Every now and then I still hope she made it somewhere okay. My dad's friend Ray was a long-haul trucker and would drop in on us every now and again when he was in the area. We always knew it was him when his truck came rumbling down our quiet, residential street. He always had stories to tell, but the best ones told were the ones after all the kids had gone off to sleep and it was just him and my mom and dad hanging out on the porch, with a bottle of Presidente while Ray smoked. My sister and I would creep into my parents' bedroom, whose window faced out over the porch, and quietly listen as they talked. We had to wait a good while till Ray got to talking about the good stuff. Usually it was wild tales about people he met on the road. Hitchhikers and runaways, a stray dog that he kept with him for a while until one day it sauntered off and never came back. Sometimes he told ghost stories, like the one where an old lady sat beside him at a diner and he looked around to see who she was with and a flustered lady came and led her away, briefly apologizing to him. Later that night he kept catching glimpses of the old lady sitting on the passenger seat. But when he turned his head she wasn't there. He chalked it up to being tired and sleepy, but he said he kept seeing her for the next couple of weeks till a friend told him to talk to her and ask what she wanted. So he did and never saw her again. Or the one where he saw his own dad, long since passed away, waving him down as he drove through Refugio, a small Texas town. He chalked that up to exhaustion too, and pulled over to stretch his legs and get a quick bite to eat. He was at a small gas station eating a hot dog or something when he said he saw state troopers barrel through town, sirens silent, lights flashing. Found out there had been some kind of shootout and he thinks if he'd kept going he might have ended up in the midst of it. But the one story that still pops into my head from time to time, when I least expect it, and usually when I'm alone, is when he was driving through Arizona, just outside of Phoenix. He said it was just getting dark when he saw the station wagon flipped over on the side of the road and a semi pulled off to the side on the opposite side of the road. No emergency vehicles yet. He pulled over in front the station wagon and called it in on his CB, then ran back to see if he could help. He noticed a young woman circling the station wagon, looking distraught. He asked her if she was okay, who else was in the car, but she didn't answer, just walked around looking lost. He turned back to the vehicle and saw the driver was conscious but bleeding from his head. He helped get him out and together they got 2 kids out from the back seat. The kids were conscious but asked for their mom. That's when Ray remembered the young woman and turned back to look for her, but she was gone. Emergency services arrived and he stood by and watched while they pulled the wagon upright. He left when he saw the lifeless body of the young woman pulled out of the wreck. He said he couldn't sleep for weeks after and only with the light on. In fact, that's around the time he picked up a random stray dog to keep him company because he didn't like the thought of being alone. My dad is a truck driver. He told us this story one night over dinner. One night, he was in southern Texas, near Brownsville. He had just settled in, clocked out for the night, and was about to get into bed. Suddenly, there is a green light, a laser pointer, shining through his glass. He looks out his window and spots a man pointing a light in his truck. Dad's in a pretty sketchy area, so he's not certain of what this man is doing. Dad starts his truck up, and attempts to drive away. There's only one problem with this. He cannot go above 5 miles per hour, or else he'll automatically be clocked back in. Truck drivers are given 14 hours to be loaded up and start driving every day. They get paid by the mile, so the sooner they get going, the more money they'll be making. However, you are only permitted those 14 hours. Once you hit 14 hours, you are required to take a mandatory 10-hour rest break. Dad had already hit that 14-hour limit. If he clocked back onto the road for longer than those 14 hours, DOT, Department of Transportation, will start getting involved and his job will be at risk. As I said, you can drive 5 miles per hour without being clocked back in. But beyond that, you will automatically clock in. Back to the story. As my dad slowly begins moving across the parking lot, the man with the laser pointer begins following him. Still shining the pointer into his cab. Once he sees the man following him, he starts getting nervous. As I said, Dad was in a pretty sketchy area. Dad grabs his gun, and calls the local police and explains the situation. Tells them he doesn't know what this guy's intentions are. Tells them he doesn't know if he's signaling his buddies to target his truck or what. They send an officer his way. 5 minutes later, an officer arrives and talks to the man. Dad steps out and talks to the officer too. The man with the laser pointer sees them, and just smiles. He gives them very pleasant greetings. The casual, "Good evening, gentlemen. How are you?" Just being all around really sweet. Turns out, this man is relatively old. Older than my dad by an easy 20 years. When my dad and the officer ask the man what he's doing, he tells them, "I am blessing this here gentleman's truck, sir. I hope to ward off any demons that would threaten to harm this man in his travels." Dad looks at the officer, looks at the man, then smiles real sweetly. Tells him, "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. But I would like to ask that you would stop, please. I am trying to go to sleep." The man just smiles, and nods. "It's okay. I've already finished blessing your truck. I was about to go on and bless that truck over there." He points to a red Peterbilt truck that was parked a few dozen feet from my dad's truck. The officer lets him know that that's not necessary. Like a child, the man gets a disappointed look on his face and says, "Oh. Okay. I'm sorry, mister." The officer then offers to take the man home. He and my dad talk for a little while longer, and the officer leaves, taking the man home. The next morning carries on as usual as my dad heads back up north to deliver another load. Sadly, this story has no happy ending. As without the man blessing drivers' trucks, the demons have taken over the truck stop, and are now haunting anyone who dares enter their grounds. My father was lucky he made it out in time. Driving home from work one night, it's probably about 10:30 or so. I live out on a farm in western KY and there's a neighboring cattle farm I pass on the way. As I make the turn onto this little access road, I see a mountain lion slink across the road in front of me. Everyone called me crazy, and Fish and Wildlife told me there weren't mountain lions in the area, until next deer season, where a few hunters either photographed or shot one. They still deny they're here. To set the scene, I was fracking out in the desert in West Texas. We were working in some small mountains north of Pecos. At this point it was around 2 a.m. and I was driving on a small dirt road roughly 100 yards from the frack pad when a mountain lion ran right in front of the truck and off into the darkness. I had never seen one in person and didn't know they were in the area. One of my hands was asleep in a camp chair about 200 yards from when it ran from. It scared the shit out of him when I told him. For the rest of the time we were out there he didn't sleep at work. Not chills, really, but maybe a little along with sense of awe after I recognized what it was. At 2 in the morning driving through Kansas I saw a meteor going through the atmosphere along with a long tail of sparks behind it that I watched from my driver's side window for what seemed like 5 minutes or so, but probably was in reality probably not much more than a minute. But it was extremely spectacular and I can see why people think some occurrences like that are some kind of alien spacecraft. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.